Hello, and thank you for joining our Teaching for the 21st Century webinar brought to you by the David Horowitz Freedom Center and the Glazov Gang. I am your host, Annie Cyrus. If you have any questions, please put them in the Q&A box you see on your screen. And tonight we have a very, very special guest that I'm a big fan of his book. I hope so are you. Tonight with us, we have Tyler O'Neill. He's a senior editor at PJ Media. Also, he's the author of the book, Making Hate Pay, The Corruption of Southern Poverty Law Center. Tyler, it's such an honor to have you with us tonight.
Great to be with you, Annie.
Thank you so much. We are all very excited to hear all your thoughts. So, floor is yours.
All right, great. Well, I'd just like to thank Annie again for hosting this webinar, for having me, and really for telling her story and having the courage to go out there. I mean, we have a remarkable host. She grew up in Iran. She was forced into a marriage at the tender age of 13. She received multiple beatings and had to be smuggled out of Iran to Turkey, and now is sharing her story and sharing the horrible things that happen to women under these Sharia Islamist countries like Iran and under this kind of oppression. So it's really an honor to speak with you. But the reason I'm talking so much about Annie is because when brave women like her stand up to expose the abuses of Islamists and the horrific way women are treated in Islamist countries like Iran, they often face pushback from surprising corners. The Southern Poverty Law Center, ostensibly a civil rights organization, has repeatedly attacked Annie as an anti-Muslim provocateur. Yes, the SPLC has no shame in targeting a woman who was beaten, forced into marriage at age 13 in Iran, and smuggled out of Iran after getting beaten repeatedly. Even in the US, it seems the Iran regime is trying to kill her, and she has had to move many times. But the Southern Poverty Law Center, doesn't seem to think of her as a victim or as a freedom fighter or someone sharing her truth courageously. And the SPLC has a history of smearing former Muslims who come out and speak, and of smearing those who remain Muslims but speak out against Islamism and the inspiration behind radical Islamic terrorism. Just a few years ago, the SPLC smeared Muslim reformer Maajid Nawaz as an anti-Muslim extremist and made numerous false statements in condemning him, and he sued for defamation. He won a $3.375 million settlement, which I discuss in the book, but the SPLC formally apologized to him, but continues to brand as hate any criticism of Islamism or the threat of radical interpretations of Sharia. It works hand in glove with the Council on American Islamic Relations, and the two of them have pressured hotels to cancel events with the national security organization Act for America, run by Lebanese American, a very powerful Lebanese American woman who came over to this country and is warning to make sure that America does not become like Lebanon, overridden from a jewel in the Middle East to almost a backwater with the radical Islamists that come in and overran it. So when CARE and the SPLC attacked Act for America, they actually convinced Mar-a-Lago and the Trump organization to drop an event last year. None other than Mar-a-Lago, the southern White House, canceled an event because of the SPLC's pressuring. And Dr. M. Zuhdi Jasser, founder and president of the American Islamic Forum for Democracy, when he endorsed my book, he said that the SPLC has done untold damage to many leading thinkers in areas like the work I've dedicated my life to as a devout Muslim in counter-Islamism. He said it was long overdue for a journalist to take on the corruption that runs the core of the SPLC. And he said that my book is a must-read for those who care about the truth and refuse to treat minorities like our Muslim community with a pathological bigotry of low expectations. So how did the SPLC go from a noble civil rights organization that was founded in 1971 to a smear factory who targets victims like Annie who speak out against radical Islamic terrorism? The SPLC started in 1971 when Morris Dees, the co-founder, essentially got religion. He was a really pioneering salesman. He sold cakes in college. He did everything he could to make a buck when he was in high school, and he made a tremendous profit selling cookbooks with a college roommate of his. That college roommate, Millard Fuller, went on to found Habitat for Humanity. And around the same time, at that time, Millard Fuller got religion. He became a Christian missionary, sold got rid of his millions of dollars, sold his Lamborghini that he had worked so hard to buy, and went into full-time missionary work. Morris Dees, who in the 1960s regretted not joining the civil rights movement and putting his life on the line there, decided that he would sell his business and go into work doing civil rights work. And at first, Morris Dees did a lot of very admirable work. The Southern Poverty Law Center helped get the first African Americans elected in the South after Reconstruction. They got some people who were falsely accused of things like rape and murder off of death row. And this was a very noble organization at the start. But Morris Dees had various types of corruption that seeped in through him to the Southern Poverty Law Center and transformed it into an avenue, into a smear factory that goes after conservative and Christian organizations in the United States. So Morris Dees had a history with the Ku Klux Klan. He actually represented a Klan member in a notorious case in the South during the Civil Rights Movement. He was on the wrong side of history. And Morris Dees later developed a grudge, so much so that he actually put a shotgun in the face of the man he formerly represented. But Dees was very political from the start. He, in 1972, right after he founded the Southern Poverty Law Center, he went to work for George McGovern's presidential campaign. And George McGovern was a very liberal Democratic figure, and he lost in a landslide to Richard Nixon in that race. But Morris Dees raised boatloads of cash for him because, as Dees later said, the more radical an organization is, the easier it is to raise money for them. And so he learned from raising money for George McGovern that he could push the SPLC in a partisan direction, further and further to the left. And he got the donors from the McGovern campaign and used them to rake in cash for the SPLC. But the real corruption started when he started using the SPLC to attack the Ku Klux Klan. Now, the Ku Klux Klan is a horrible group in America. It is, by all accounts, a hate group, a terrorist organization with a horrific history. But Morris Dees was essentially shooting fish in a barrel by the time he started going after the SPLC in the 1980s. And his fellow lawyers at the SPLC actually quit en masse because they said that Morris Dees was taking the organization away from its civil rights, from its noble civil rights calling, into attacking the KKK, which, deserved to be attacked. Well, the KKK didn't last very long after Dees started bankrupting its organizations, and Dees turned in search of fresh fields to conquer. He found all sorts of different organizations he could brand hate groups and smear with a hate label. And eventually, he expanded that definition to ever more increasingly mainstream organizations. So you have the Family Research Council, you have Alliance Defending Freedom, you have Act for America, you have, in one very revealing case, he went after a small Catholic nonprofit called the Ruth Institute. And the reason why the Ruth Institute is a hate group, according to the SPLC, is because they quoted directly from the Catechism of the Catholic Church to say that homosexuality is intrinsically disordered. And this is a document held by 1 billion Christians across the world. You don't get much more mainstream than that. But according to the SPLC, that's a reason to put you on a hate map and list you along with the Ku Klux Klan. So this is a very defamatory label. We saw in 2012, a shooter actually went to the Family Research Council with a semi-automatic pistol and a bag of Chick-fil-A chicken sandwiches, planning to shoot everyone in the building and put a Chick-fil-A chicken sandwich by their heads. This man was duly convicted of planning a terrorist attack. Thankfully, the attack was prevented. A brave security guard named Leo Johnson took a shot in the arm from which he will never fully recover. But thankfully, that was the only full damage that was done. Even so, this shows what the SPLC list means. And the SPLC hate group list has been cited. It's used by Amazon to blacklist charities from its Amazon Smile platform. It's relied upon by Democrats who cite it routinely in Senate testimony. Al Franken compared Alliance Defending Freedom to the Cambodian dictator Pol Pot, who slaughtered 1/4 of his population. Just because Alliance Defending Freedom, which is a mainstream conservative Christian legal group that has won multiple cases before the Supreme Court, because they were on this hate group list, he compared them to a dictator who slaughtered his own people. This is the kind of way that the SPLC is viewed. It's given far too undue credibility and reliability. And this is particularly damning because the SPLC just last year had a racial discrimination and sexual harassment scandal burst out that led Morris Dees to being fired. So you have this civil rights charity, right? This civil rights nonprofit that's regarded as the gold standard by a lot of corporate America, big tech, the Democratic Party. And they have been for decades not treating their Black staffers well, not elevating them to higher positions of authority. Black staffers have actually said that the SPLC felt like a plantation because they were not treated well at the organization. And women, Morris Dees, in 1986, he had a divorce case with his third wife, and now he's at number 6, I believe. But Morris Dees is a notorious philanderer who slept with women who were applying for jobs at the SPLC. This kind of thing that you would think this would be a huge scandal in the age of Me Too, that people would still be talking about it right now. But the SPLC pushed it under the rug, and most of the mainstream media seems to still regard them as credible, even though they had this humongous scandal. They actually promised an internal review, and the internal review has not had any results after a year later, after the explosive allegations came to light. So this is a very corrupt organization. It goes back to Morris Dees' desire to make a buck. There's actually a story where a bereaved mother lost her son. I mean, this was in the South, and she lost her son. The black mother, black boy. She tragically lost her son in a lynching, and the SPLC went after the group that was responsible for the lynching. They actually bankrupted the organization, which is great. But the organization, they got this multi-million-dollar settlement. The organization only had $50,000 to its name. So the mother got $50,000 of the millions of dollars that the court had ordered this group to give her. The SPLC, meanwhile, goes to its donors and says, hey, we got a multi-million-dollar settlement. We bankrupted this group. Send us money. The SPLC rakes in millions and millions of dollars off of that fundraising campaign. And how much of that money does the mother see? Even worse, the mother wanted to do a documentary of her story. And she started going to various producers like HBO. And at the same time, Morris Dees swept in with his documentary featuring her story. He was competing with her, and her story never got told because Morris Dees was out there pushing for his glory and his money to overtake the situation. So throughout its history, the SPLC, it started with great ambitions, with really strong successes for civil rights, but it became more and more corrupt. And now what it's doing is launching a repetitive character assassination, defamation campaign against people who speak the truth about Islamism, against conservative Christians, against a broad range of people who are considered conservative in the United States. But, just being conservative, according to the SPLC, gets you a hate label.
Well, yes. First of all, thank you for the information. I'm pretty sure 99% of the details you have in your book, and also what you just talked about, I'm pretty sure you're not going to find them on any website, any mainstream media, because SPLC is supposedly this really awesome civil rights organization. That's at least how they try to paint it. And yes, you're right. If you don't mind me inserting something here, you mentioned part of the presentation, you mentioned how they went after a small Christian organization because they used this, part of Catholic scripture of, being gay is this and that. And they actually, one out of 8 times that SPLC has targeted me personally, once they targeted me because I quoted a verse from Quran, which is chapter 4, verse 3, that says, if you pay enough for a child, for a girl underage, as long as you pay enough, you can have her as your wife. They accused me of showing hate toward a specific group of people based on a mistranslation that I took out of Quran. The hypocrisy when it comes to SPLC.
Yeah.
If you're a Christian, there is no misunderstanding, there is no generalizing, there is no stereotyping. They come after you. But if you're a Muslim, and the funny thing about me, since you brought it up, they always label me as an anti-Muslim speaker. And I actually introduced myself as anti-Sharia activist. I have no problem with Muslims. I actually personally think the #1 victims of Islam are Muslims.
Yeah.
I'm trying to save Muslim women and girls from the suffering, but they still label me the anti-Muslim speaker.
And that's the thing that really got me, is when they went after Majid Nawaz and called him anti-Muslim. And it's like, hello, I'm a Muslim, and they go after Act for America, which has worked with Mzudi Jasser, which has worked with, Muslim reformers who are opposing Sharia supremacy, but still adhere to their understanding of Islam. The SPLC goes after them anyway. It's like, what? I thought you were in the business of protecting Muslims. But.
Exactly. And that's the thing. When it comes to SPLC, as you said, if you're a conservative, that's all it takes. Being a conservative, then you're a hateful person. But then the breakdown comes to, of course, #1, if you speak against Islam, either you're a Muslim, you're a moderate Muslim, you're a reformer, you're an ex-Muslim, whatever you are, you're a hate group. I actually make this joke. I'm like, I'm pretty sure it's just me and me by myself, but they think I'm a group. So I go with it. That's all right. And then the second thing is the labeling of racism. It was the most amazing thing when they labeled me a racist, bigoted person. Where I come from Middle East, I am brown, and I'm talking against a regime of my motherland, and that is the definition of racist for SPLC.
Yeah.
But when CARE has lawyers who are American white Muslims calling me all sort of name, they are not considered racist in eyes of SPLC.
Yeah, well, of course. I mean, how could their allies be racist? And I think that's one of the reasons why, this tremendous Me Too scandal, right at the heart of the SPLC, this big scandal where former Black employees called them a plantation, it was mentioned maybe once or twice as an aside when they were talking about Morris Dees getting fired. But now, the mainstream media never brings it up. They'll cite the SPLC as a source on hate, and then they won't say, oh, the SPLC, which has a Me Too scandal and which fired its co-founder last year over claims of racial discrimination and sexual harassment. No, none of that gets mentioned. None of the fact that they've paid millions in defamation lawsuits. No, they're an authority. And the thing that scares me is that just in January, they testified before Congress asking big tech and the government to silence hate groups. Why? Because they said that hate groups are a statistically significant measure of the threat of white supremacist terrorism. So, you have these guys, and it's horrible and evil what some of these guys have done, but the guys, the real white supremacist terrorists, are few and far between, don't have any connections to any groups. And then the vast majority of the SPLC's hate groups aren't even on the basis of race. They're on the basis of, saying someone's anti-Muslim or anti-LGBT or anti-immigrant. It's like they say that the way they define a hate group is based on someone's immutable characteristics. And then they say anti-immigrant is a hate group, when being an immigrant, last I checked, is not an immutable characteristic.
Well, I always say I'm the perfect example of a hate group for them. I am Middle Eastern, I'm Iranian, I'm an ex-Muslim, former child bride who immigrated to America, but I am labeled as anti-Muslim, anti-immigrant, racist, white supremacist. How does that work? It's beyond me. But I'll be honest with you, the very first time I was ever named on their website, after my speaking engagement in Illinois, Chicago, I felt so honored. I felt like I actually have achieved my goal. Because when SPLC considers me a hate group, that means I am making a difference in waking people up into dangers of Sharia coming to this country. That's how I took it. I took it as a medal of honor. Like, please do name me a hate group over and over, which they did. But I don't know, most of the time I see a hate group on SPLC, I consider them my allies. As you said, like Act for America, Jihad Watch, Robert Spencer, Pamela Geller, all these names have been mentioned. And I consider all of them my ally. They are fellow freedom fighters who are doing exactly what I'm doing. So again, I don't know where, maybe I should start with this, and I don't want to take too much of your time and our audience because we do have some questions. Let me start by this question for you. Does SPLC tangibly have any credibility left as far as what they represent for our society?
When it comes to monitoring hate, no. Absolutely nothing. They do a little bit of work representing people in concrete legal cases. That's not horrible, but the short answer is no, they don't.
with that answer of no, then who's giving all this money to SPLC? If they're not credible, where are they getting their finances?
So they're getting money from Apple and Apple CEO Tim Cook. They're getting money from JP Morgan. They're getting money from George Soros, of course. They're getting money from a whole bunch of people. And the worst thing is, the thing that continues to rankle me about this, there are hundreds of donors across America who give to the SPLC thinking that the SPLC is some scrappy organization fighting hate out there, that they are a reliable, civil rights group. And I just wish I could tell those people, no, don't waste your money on this organization. Because there are a lot of people who have been duped. And, I think a great deal of the left-leaning media has been duped. A great deal of corporate America and big tech has been duped. But the worst and the saddest is when you have donors who, and there are stories of this in the book, a donor who decided not to buy a coat that she needed for the winter because she thought it was too important to give money to the SPLC. It's like, no, take care of yourself. Don't give money to this organization.
I will quickly take advantage of this moment and say, anyone who's looking for a good cause to not buy themselves a coat and give that money as donation, go to frontpagemag.com, because at David Horowitz Freedom Center, this is what they do. They bring you actual experts to tell you the truth. So send your donations that way.
Yeah. And I mean, in the age of coronavirus, there are so many as well. I'm consistently impressed by Samaritan's Purse, despite the hate that they get. But the way that they went and set up that temporary hospital in New York City just inspired me. And the way that they consistently saved people from the virus, they served over 300 patients in New York Central Park. And at the same time, they were getting protested. They were getting accused of hate. They were, getting pushed out by New York's politicians. I mean, anyway, there's a little tangent.
Yes. But since we were talking about money, there's another question about SPLC's money, which is, how much money does SPLC have in foreign accounts, and why is that legal, or how do they get away with it?
Yeah, they have millions upon millions of dollars in foreign accounts. I might be able to pull it up, but it really is a question how they get away with it, because there have been many attempts to reach out to the IRS and say, look, this organization is not following the rules for a 501c3 organization. And actually the concrete number, according to the most recent tax documents, is $162 million in offshore accounts. And they have offshore investments, which apparently don't rise to the level of reporting exactly how much money it is. But they have said in their IRS tax documents, hey, we have these offshore investments. So it's like, why does a civil rights nonprofit need offshore accounts, need offshore investments? Like, what is going on there? And this is an organization that has more than $500 million in its endowment. It has $500 million, and it needs offshore accounts. Like, there are all sorts of big questions, and it really goes to show how lucrative what Morris Dees, discovered. His process of going after small organizations, destroying, in the case of the KKK, really bad organizations, but increasingly more mainstream, and using that battle to raise boatloads of cash. It's made the SPLC a $500 million organization, and a very influential one at that.
Yeah, as they always say, follow the money. Which there's another question asked about taxes. Actually, it says, "What about tax laws? Is SPLC acting legally by their tax status?"
So that is an excellent question. The IRS has been asked on multiple occasions to investigate that because the SPLC routinely goes after conservative and Republican politicians, but nobody on the other side of the spectrum. And that's a problem when you're a 501c3 nonprofit, because you're not allowed to engage in electioneering. So the SPLC actually recently opened a 501c4 action arm so that they could do that more legally. But the problem is they continue to use the 501c3 to attack people like President Donald Trump. In the most recent hate group report, they mentioned Trump no fewer, well, I could get the exact number right. They mentioned him upwards of 70 times. You know, when they're talking about hate groups, they have to find a way to smuggle Trump in there over and over again. And that really should violate the SPLC's 501c3 tax exempt status.
That's what I was just about to say. And did you say 70 times in just one campaign, or is it like 70 times of smearing President Trump all over their website in general?
One report. So, oh no, forgive me, it's 66 times.
Oh, that's much better.
66, yes, that's so much better than 70. They mentioned him 66 times just in the report on hate groups for 2019.
Wow.
Yeah.
It's very interesting that the questions are actually, it's like you kind of know what the next question is. Somebody actually asked or said, "I call SPLC a smear machine." Would you agree with that label for what they do, or maybe it's something else?
Oh yeah, no, they're definitely. I've called them a smear factory many times. I think they are being sued for defamation by a lot of different people. Some of the falsely accused hate groups, and some people who have been caught up in the SPLC's attacks and actually harmed personally by it. There's this lawyer in Baltimore who got fired after the SPLC ran a defamatory article against him. And it's like this organization has destroyed lives, and now it's being called on it in court. And I think these people should prevail. But the way that our law, the way that New York Times versus Sullivan is, it's very, very hard to meet the standards for a defamation lawsuit. So some of the suits don't go as far as they should. Like D. James Kennedy Ministries had their defamation lawsuit struck down. Now they're filing an appeal, and I think they have a very good case. When you have a terrorist attack based on this hate group accusation, it's really doing concrete harm out there. And some people do ask me, do I consider the SPLC to be a hate group? And I don't, because I think that the term hate group means something. When the SPLC went after the Ku Klux Klan and called them a hate group, they were correct. And now when they go after groups that are not like the Ku Klux Klan and they call them hate groups based on the SPLC's long history of fighting the Ku Klux Klan, which supposedly gives them the credibility to determine who is and who isn't a hate group, then that's the standard by which they should be judged in court on defamation. And that does not make them a hate group, but it does make them a smear factory.
Agreed. I personally call SPLC a traitor group. They will give anything up as far as American values goes to raise money. That's how I look at them. And again, if they weren't so deeply in love with Islamization of America, I wouldn't go as far as saying that. But the moment I realized they will protect Islam with everything they got is when I realized, because we both know, I'm sure most of our audience also know, that Islamic leaders of Islamic countries can buy their way into anywhere if the person is willing to sell, because they're pretty rich. I mean, Saudi Arabia, Islamic Republic of Iran, they give billions if needed to be protected and to be promoted and to be covered up. And that's what SPLC is doing. They're literally doing that. They're taking the money to project this horrifying cult as a peaceful religion by smearing those of us who are trying to expose it. Correct?
Well, I think, yeah, I have not seen any evidence of a money trail going back to there. I think the SPLC has enough, talking about this red-green axis, the SPLC has a long track record of supporting the Islamist-friendly groups like CARE, working with them. I think it's an ideological alliance, and maybe it's a money one too. I mean, George Soros, some of the donors, that they have could be pushing them in that direction. But yes, in terms of American values and defending America from the threat of radical Islamism, and those interpretations of Sharia, the SPLC is falling asleep on the job, and it is damaging our country.
Agreed. We are almost out of time. Let me ask this question. You did mention that there has been some turnovers at SPLC. So the question is, who are now the actual leaders of SPLC, and where do they come from? Being, what's their background?
Yeah, so the SPLC actually just got a new president. Yeah, Margaret Huang, who was the executive director of Amnesty International. So another one of these organizations that, supposedly supports victims, but has become a liberal, far left advocacy organization. And I don't know exactly who's fully in control over at the SPLC. When it comes to their hate group accusations, I think the staffers have some backing, but you clearly see the imprint of Morris Dees. And, they fired Morris Dees. They claim not to be connected with him anymore. And, for the past 10 years, even at the SPLC, he wasn't going into the office much. He actually said that the scandal couldn't involve him because he wasn't going into the office very much. And it's like, well, your history and what you've done and how you've interacted with people and the way you set up this organization, it clearly bears your handprints. And the fact that they continue to rake in this cash suggests to me that they're not reconsidering their positions anytime soon.
Understandable. And here's the last question that normally goes to me. So my question for you is, average Americans, we the people, is there anything we can do to bankrupt SPLC and put an end to the smear campaigns?
Yeah, well, share the corruption, share the truth as much as you can. Buy a copy of my book. I believe it's linked in the description. I've got one here, but Making Hate Pay, The Corruption of the Southern Poverty Law Center. This is an absolutely corrupt group, and actually stay attuned. Amazon is about to have its shareholder meeting. If you're an Amazon Prime member, reach out to Amazon and tell them that they shouldn't be relying on this corrupt organization for their Amazon Smile charity program, which they continue to do. Reach out to your local leaders, to your local officials, especially if you're represented by a Democrat. And in particular, what you should do is when you see your local paper quoting the SPLC as an authority on hate or extremism, send a letter to the editor and say, look, this is a bad source. Don't do this. We need to shame those who prop up the SPLC. And what you can also do, find the people, and I mentioned them in my book, the people who are suing the SPLC for defamation, and support them in any way that you can. The founder of the Proud Boys has a defamation lawsuit against them. But organizations like D. James Kennedy Ministries, and of course, Frontline, Jihad Watch, the David Horowitz Freedom Center, all these people who are spreading the truth and fighting back against these accusations. I don't know. I think we can ultimately bankrupt the SPLC, but I'd rather have them be seen as irrelevant, untrustworthy, unreliable. And if we can get the message out there, that matters more, in my estimation, than going after their money specifically. But yeah, if you ever have any ties with the IRS or your elected leaders in Congress, Tom Cotton has sent a letter to the IRS saying you need to look at the SPLC's tax-exempt status. Other Republicans should be doing the same. And even a few Democrats. Jared Polis has surprised me recently by opening up his state a little bit more during the coronavirus and revising down the death numbers. Maybe people who are reasonable can be convinced that the SPLC is corrupt. So if you live in Colorado, Jared Polis is very far on the left when it comes to LGBT issues, but maybe we can get something through.
Okay. Now, if our audience would like to follow you and support your work and read more on what you put out, where do they go?
Yeah, you go to pjmedia.com. I have, stories all over there with about the book, about the SPLC, the latest news on their corruption and what they're doing and how they can be held accountable will be on PJ Media. I also have a Twitter at Tyler2O'Neill, and you can reach out to me at by email at tyler@makinghatepay.com, and follow on social media. But the biggest thing right now, partially so that we can draw more attention to it, if you can, go over to Amazon, search Making Hate Pay. It will be the first result. Pick up a copy, recommend it to your friends. There is a cheap version. You can get the ebook or the book in print. Fantastic.
Thanks again, Tyler. I personally learned a lot, and hopefully we get you back in a little bit to give us an update on what's happening with this SPLC.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you so much, Annie.
Of course. And to our audience, everybody who watched and stayed with us, thank you so much. Here are your homeworks. Go to Amazon.com, type in Making Hate Pay, order a copy of Tyler's book to support him, and then to read it and get educated so you can do the things you just mentioned, because we need to stop organizations like SPLC if we care for our freedom, liberty, and American values. After that, head over to frontpagemag.com and consider making a 100% tax-deductible donation so the center can continue bringing you webinars like this one for free. With that being said, thank you so much. Stay safe, and we will see you next week. Bye-bye.